Yeah, and I was like, oh, well, this would be really cool to paint, or this would challenge me in trying to carve these textures. So sometimes it's just wanting a personal challenge. But the flesh or the relief carving, a lot of times I describe that as symbolic of carving away negativity or carving away adversity or stereotypes to expose the real version of yourself.
This is Platemark. It's October, the most wonderful time of the year, because coming up shortly is Print Week in New York City. My name is Ann Shafer, and I'm your host. I'm an independent curator, and I specialize in prints and printmaking. When I was a curator at the Baltimore Museum of Art, every year I would spend my entire travel budget on getting up to New York at the end of October for Print Week. This year's Print Week features two fine art print fairs. The first is the IFPDA Print Fair, which is taking place at the Jacob Javits Center, which is 429 11th Avenue on the far, far, far west side of Manhattan near Hudson Yards. The second fair is the Satellite Print Fair, which has moved to the Shop Studios at 528 West 39th Street. They're up on the third floor, it's a different place than last year, everybody, so make sure you know where you're going. But it is still just around the corner from the Javits Center. Both fairs are well worth your time, and I hope you have your tickets booked, and I hope I'll see you there. One of the cool things about the IFPDA Print Fair, IFPDA, by the way, stands for the International Fine Print Dealers Association. One of the cool things they do is that at the front of the fair, there's a space set aside for a contemporary artist to do an installation. They've had people like Swoon in the past. But this year's artist is LaToya Hobbs, who's my guest today. It's so exciting to have LaToya on Platemark today. One, because LaToya is a Baltimore artist and we love our own. And two, because LaToya is a professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And three, LaToya had an exhibition up at the Baltimore Museum of Art this past year, and it was a monumental, epic work of art that contained 15 4x8 sheets of carved plywood, 3 sheets each creating one scene, so a triptych. 5 triptychs in the end. And they were describing 5 different stages of her day as an artist and a mother of 2 young boys. At the end of the exhibition, the BMA purchased that work from LaToya, which is not only a marker of support and confidence in her as an artist and her growth, but, places her in a major museum. So all good for LaToya. I was really grateful to her for her spending time with me. I feel like bringing you people directly is the best way to get you not only interested in her art, but also excited about her art and her output. So you'll be able to see her work front and center as you enter the IFPDA Fair, and I'm just thrilled for her. She will be featured on Friday, October 28th at the IFPDA Print Fair in a panel discussion called Continuum, a conversation with current and former members of Black Women of Print. There will be an introduction to the panel by Jennifer Farrell, one of the print curators at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The panel itself will be moderated by Kimberly Gant, who is the Brooklyn Museum of Art curator. The panelists will include LaToya, but also Delita Martin, Stephanie Santana, and Jennifer Mack Watkins. It is taking place within the fair space. There's a set-aside event space within the fair, and that will take place Friday, October 28th at 1 p.m. Today's special episode is sponsored by the IFPDA, the International Fine Print Dealers Association. I so appreciate their support, and I hope we can continue our partnership into the future. Before I get moving, I want to relate my positionality. I identify as a cis het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Lastly, I'd like to ask listeners to support our good work at Platemark. We're working hard to deliver excellent content, and I don't know that you will find print and printmaking content like this in very many places in the podcasting sphere. I feel like there's maybe 4 or 5 of us out here doing it. Your support would really mean a lot to us. There's a donate and support button over on the platemarkpodcast.com website. It gives you 2 options, one for a monthly sustaining membership at $5 and the other for a one-time donation of your choice. We would sure appreciate your help, and I thank you so much. All right, buckle up and let's get rolling. LaToya, it is great to see you. Thank you for joining me to talk about prints and other things. The print world is just full of the nicest people, and I count you among them. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
doing
much.
this. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So, one of the reasons I wanted to invite you, obviously, is because you're in Baltimore, as I am. So, we have crossed paths in other ways in town, but you're doing some cool and fun things, particularly for one of my favorite events of the year, the IFPDA Print Fair, which is coming up in the end of October in New York City. And there's a special thing that's going to happen there that involves you. Before we get to that, why don't you introduce yourself for people and tell them what you're up to?
My name is LaToya Hobbs. I am a practicing artist and educator, full-time faculty at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Also living and working in Baltimore, as you mentioned just a moment ago. I'm a mother. I have two children. My youngest son is 6, and my oldest son will be 8 in October. Also a wife. So yeah, just a lot of different things going on.
It's that kind of sums up your entire body of work at the moment, the juggling act.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have two sons of my own, although they're both out of college. So I can cast my mind back to 6 and 8 and I kind of bow down to people who are getting through that time. Although I have to say, the 10-year-old boy was perfect for me. It was just the right amount of I still want to hug you and I'm interested and I can reason with you, all that stuff. So you got something to look forward to. Okay, so I always ask people when printmaking became an apparent thing for you because I feel like it's not something that people come across unless they're looking or some teacher is like, hey, you should try this thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so that was, well, it was forced upon me, I guess
Ah,
is a way to say it. So, in terms of my educational background, I started out studying painting at the University of Arkansas, Little Rock, which is my hometown, Little Rock, Arkansas. And so, within that program, regardless of what your major is or what your concentration is, you are required to take one of every studio course. And so I had to take photography, I had to take sculptural design, I had to take, and then I had to take printmaking. And so I kind of knew what it was, but not really. And so I had this mindset that, well, I'm a painting major, like I don't really need printmaking. Like why
who
do I
needs that?
yeah, why do I have to take this class? And so, I mean, I did okay in the class.
Who was the professor?
My professor was AJ Smith at the time, another amazing printmaker also. He actually introduced me to the work of Elizabeth Catlett. He said, based on the type of images that I was doing, he was like, well, you need to be looking at Elizabeth Catlett's work. And so once I saw her work, I was like, oh, you can do this with printmaking. And so it opened up a whole new world for me, a whole, different experience. And then at the time, I didn't really know a lot of Black or African American artists, sadly. So, a lot of people weren't shown to us in art history classes. And so I was on my own exploration to do my own kind of art history, researching artists who are not just technically proficient, which I'm happy, to learn about the Rembrandts and all those people because of the technical master of their work, but finding artists who spoke to me specifically in terms of my culture and in terms of my experience was that I was searching for that at the time. And I think Elizabeth Catlett was one of the first people to kind of fill that void for me on a personal level. So her work, just speaking through the medium of printmaking, was very significant.
Was it because the way in which she was creating the work visually, or was it the idea of print as multiple?
I think it was more of the visual and the subject matter. For me, it was just something about the mark making with relief in particular. I think that's the process that I latched on to the strongest. And so, just seeing her relief work, seeing the sharecropper for the first time, and, some of her other significant works, it just kind of really spoke to me. And it made me want to get more serious about the medium. And so, even though, that required class was over, I decided to start taking some independent studies because I want to learn more about this medium and about this process. And so I just fell in love with printmaking, and I took maybe at least maybe 2 more independent studies under him. So in addition to the course requirements that I had to finish up for painting, I started adding extra classes just to get more proficient with printmaking. And so my senior show was half painting, half printmaking. And then I also decided that I wanted to go to graduate school. I was going to apply to go under printmaking.
Did you go straight through from undergrad to grad?
Yes, yeah. And so that was a motivation for also wanting to do some extra independent study so I can kind of build up a portfolio to submit for.
You've done other kinds of printmaking besides relief?
So that initial printmaking class was like an intro class. So we had to do everything. So we started with relief and then we had to do etching and then we did, I think we ended with like lithography, which it was beautiful, but my least favorite.
It's
My
my least
least
favorite
favorite
too.
to do. I'm just like too many steps. Like you mess up one thing and it messes up everything else. I like things that I could do by myself. The way I was taught with though, one person wetting the stone and then the other person like doing the fan. I didn't like that. So I was like, well, I don't want to have to depend on somebody else to meet me in the studio to be able to do my work. So I was like trying to do it both things myself. And I was like, this is just so cumbersome. And so, yeah, I think relief just, I love texture. And I just kind of love like the immediacy of that mark. I put that mark down. I know what the mark is. I know what the mark looks like. The mark's not going to disappear if I mess up a step or something like that. So yeah, so I just really fell in love with relief.
I feel like it's also the most, it's not the most, everything's physical, obviously, but it's the one that you can really like, like
Mhm.
create imagery that is super fine and smooth and all that. But you can also go out to the German expressionists and just be like, life sucks. And,
Mhm.
its versatility, I think, is super appealing. When did you figure out that painting and printmaking could be combined in a way that made sense conceptually and visually? When did that happen?
Yeah, so that speaks to the goals of my current practice or the things that I'm exploring now is which is like combining my painting and printmaking practice together. So I'm doing a lot of mixed media works on wood panels so I can do everything. I can carve into the panel, I can paint on it, I can collage on it. So the first iteration of that happened in 2012, finishing, I graduated with my M.F.A from Purdue University in 2013. So that kind of last year and a half, I was thinking about ways to make my work more contemporary, I guess is the easiest way to say it. Because, I would get comments. I don't know if it was meant to be like a backhanded comment, that like my work was so traditional. And part of that, think is because I was, so focused on the figure and so focused on perfecting this technical aspect of my work. And so I kind of made a decision that the figure is not something that I'm willing to get rid of. And so I think a lot of, at least from the experience of what I hear from other friends who went to different programs, they were kind of swayed away from doing the figure or doing representational work. And but I just decided, well, that's not going to change. That's a very important part of my practice. So, well, my question was, what can I do to evolve my work with the figure? And so I was already doing a lot of large scale woodcuts. And so for me, I started to become more enamored with the block itself than with the prints that you produce from it. And I remember I had done a printing session and I was working with these different colors and then I cleaned off the block and I was like, this just looks so beautiful with this color and this carving. And so I was like, well, why can't the wood block be the art object itself? And so that was just kind of birthed out of a way for me to see what else can I add to the conversation that I'm having about the figure. And so it was just quite a natural thing for me to take the things that I'm already doing and figuring out ways to kind of synthesize them and bring them together.
You print the first and do an edition and then transform the block into an object, or does it ever have you gotten to the place where the block is the block and you never print from it?
Yes, yeah. So those initial works, they were just, in my mind existing as mixed media paintings is the way I described them. So they were a lot more loose than the work that I do now. And then it was kind of a back and forth. So there was painting and then carving into the painting and then repainting and then kind of this layered process. And so for me it was really engaging. And so I just liked the fact that the surfaces were so rich, the figure ground relationship was so rich and so many different layers. So the first iteration of them were just meant to be paintings and not something that I was going to print from and then kind of go back to the block later. Now I work in a few different modes. So I still do, what we call like my traditional printmaking work where I'm solely carving a block for the purpose to produce an edition. And then I like to call what I think of as hybrid works. And so I have, and these are usually smaller blocks. And so I'll carve an image, I'll print a small edition of 5 or 7 from it, and then I'll go back to the block and say, okay, now how can I change this or activate it as a painting surface? And then I have other pieces that I know, from the start, it's just going to be a mixed media painting. Like this piece back here on
Okay.
my wall, if you can see. So that nothing's going to be printed from that. I'm just, carving on the surface and collaging and painting and doing all these different things together.
So the carving becomes just another means of creating an image or a part of an image on a surface.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
instead of picking up the brush, I'm picking up the carving tools.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're really a sculptor too.
I kind of think of myself in that way. So I would say another class that I really enjoyed in undergrad was the 3D sculpture class, working with clay. I didn't really delve into that as much because I like the idea of having work that I could do anywhere. And so, I was like, you can paint anywhere. I can do that at any time. And with relief, if I don't have a press, I can still make prints if I want to. So that's another reason why I latched on to, the relief process more so than some of the other things. But in terms of image formation, I am thinking about if I was forming this object or thing with clay, how would I be sculpting it? And that's how I determine which way my carving marks are going to go
Oh, okay.
across the surface.
So in one of them, I forget the title of it, I'm sorry, but I will post any image we talk about on our show notes, so not to worry everybody. But there was one where the dress of it's a self-portrait. The dress is the part that's carved. Like, how do you decide which part gets carved and which part doesn't? And does that add some layer of conceptual, is there a reason for it?
Yeah, so that piece that you're referring to is called Portrait of a Mother, I believe. Even though I'm doing a lot of mixed media stuff, some things lean a little bit more toward my painting practice and some things lean a little bit more toward my printmaking practice. I would exemplify that one as one that leans a little bit more toward painting, but there's still elements of, my work as a printmaker. And so the dress is specifically carved as another way for me to add texture, an unexpected way to add texture. And so it either flip flops. So normally when I have a figure, either the flesh is painted with oil and whatever their garments are, either collaged or carved, or the flesh is carved and then the garments are like painted and collaged. So I flip flop between. And sometimes it's really just the image, what speaks to me. If I look
Fair
at something
enough.
and I was like, oh well, this would be really cool to paint, or like this would challenge me in trying to carve these textures. So sometimes it's just wanting a personal challenge. But the flesh or the relief carving, a lot of times I describe that as symbolic of carving away negativity or carving away adversity to expose the real version of yourself. I forget the sculptor, but I don't know if it was Michelangelo or somebody that said they have the block and they see the sculpture in the block before it's carved away. Kind of the same thing. So I have the person, but peeling away symbolically negativity or stereotypes to expose you to the actual or the real version of the
Okay.
person I'm
Huh, I
portraying.
like that. I think people get the gist of what relief is about and what woodcut and linoleum, excuse me, linoleum cut's about. But I think people probably don't understand how you can produce a printed version of said block at home without a press, and two, that you don't have to carve that deeply, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So tell us about how you do a print at home by yourself.
A lot of the printing by hand at home is because when I do have a piece that I'm going to use it in multiple ways, I carve it on a painting panel, a wood panel that a painter would paint on. And so for me, that's kind of like streamlining the presentation of it. And so I can just take that block and put a cleat on it or a wire and I hang that on the wall. And so I hand print those because I'm afraid if I put it under the press, it will crack because it's hollow
Ah, okay.
underneath. Where if
Sure.
it's just a flat, piece of cherry wood or something, like I would automatically put that through the press to save time. So the hand printing usually comes about either because I can't get to a studio to print and I don't want to, be held up with my progress, or because I'm working on a surface that I feel that the pressure from the press might cause it to crack or something like that.
Are the painting panels, are they thinner, a different make? It's not like the birch plywood that I assume you're carving on birch plywood
Yeah,
or
so
the.
they're like literally like a cradled panel. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
flat and then the cradle is like maybe an inch and a half and then it's
Okay.
like hollow on this.
Oh, okay.
So literally like a painting, like a painter's panel.
It could literally crush under the pressure of the
That's
press.
what I haven't done a test, but
Yeah, we
just
should test
like,
it.
yeah, I should, but that's like my hypothesis. And so I
Yeah.
just, well, let me just be safe and
after all that work.
And those are generally small, around 18 by 24 or 16 by 20 or something like that. That's manageable. Anything over that I would not, you know, I think I can use my time in better ways than to try to print try to print something larger by hand, especially if I have access to a press.
Right. Now, back to the ones where you're doing both an edition from the block and then using the block as the object itself, which I completely applaud you for. The reversal can be troublesome, particularly with figure roll work, right? Like things you can be drawing it one way, and when it prints, it looks completely wonky, mannerist or something weird. Like how do you balance that?
I try not to think about it. I just try to accept it for I accept it for kind of what it is. And I think, with printmakers, we train ourselves to think in reverse over time anyway. So I know a lot of people reverse their image first and then draw it so that when it prints, it's like the way they intended. I don't do that. I don't do that extra step. I think that's part of the surprise of seeing the print versus the block. So I just kind of accept the outcome and work with
Yeah.
it.
But like in the large, huge scale work that the BMA just acquired from you. So it's a narrative of your entire day across. Is each panel 3 4x8 sheets?
Hmm.
Okay, huge. We're talking huge. Like if you built it as walls, it would be an entire room, right?
Yeah, basically.
But the narrative, I mean, it's not super narrative, but it is, So like the flow of it when you print it will run backwards.
Yeah, and so I had to make some decisions at the beginning, like in the planning stages. I took a lot of time to really think about that, and a lot of decisions that I made were based on that. But from the onset, the panels were meant to be the art objects. And actually, I wasn't even going to do any prints from them. I was just like, okay, this is going to be a large mixed media piece where I'm carving and, going to do some painting and some collaging onto it. But my husband, Ariston Jacks, who's also an artist, he convinced me that, this is a major work and you need to print these blocks. That added more work because, with my normal size work, if there's a place where there's going to be collage, I don't carve it, because it's going to get covered up anyway. And so because we made the decision to print them, I had to activate every part of the block. I had to consider, everything. I couldn't just leave spaces blank. But once I got into the carving process, I was like, yeah, it doesn't need anything else. I think the carving in and of itself, I think is really powerful and really dynamic. So I just made the choice to just focus on the carving aspect of the work. But from the get-go, the panels were intended to be the thing that was going to hang in the museum space. So I had to just be okay with things being backwards, especially with some of the artworks that I'm referencing. So I use that work to reference other artists who are integral or have been influential in my practice. So I have a couple pieces by Elizabeth Catlett referenced in that piece, and Margaret Burroughs and Carrie James Marshall. So I had to be okay with their paintings being the right way in the panel pieces. And then I was like, okay, well, they'll be backwards in the printed ones. And I didn't do any text on purpose. I have a scene number 2 titled Homeschool and Housework. There's a bookshelf and some diplomas on the wall. I purposely didn't do any text on those because if I did text, then it's going to be reversed on one and then the right way on one. So I left the text off and people could kind of imply what was on the books or what was on the diplomas and things on the wall. So I had to make some decisions that from the beginning and just be okay with how some things in the prints would be backwards or that the order wouldn't have necessarily the same type of flow in terms of the planning of the compositions as the panels did. But then for me, they exist as 2 different pieces even though they're kind of the same subject matter. My husband, we were having a conversation about one versus the other, and we came to this conclusion that the panels are our experience, but then the prints can be perceived as an outside experience,
Oh.
like
Huh.
somebody else kind of looking in. And I think and this goes to stereotypes and how we perceive people. Sometimes it's opposite of what you would expect or what you think of people. So one, it represents our interior view of ourselves versus it could be interpreted as outside or exterior view.
Huh.
That was
How many did you end up printing for the edition on those?
Yeah, so I have an edition of two and an artist proof. So
Okay.
that's like, and then I had a total of 48 sheets of paper that I could use for the printing session. And so there's 15 panels each, so that, three sets of the whole thing. And then I had an extra three sheets of paper, and then I printed an extra scene five, just to have as a self portrait.
You had some hired guns helping you with that printing, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we use Lyle and Karen of Big Ink. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they have a mobile printing press, and they do printmaking workshops for people who want to carve large scale wood blocks. So they basically pack up their press and go to different art centers and locations, and spend a couple days printing with people. And so my husband and I have both done workshops with them in the past, and they went really well. And so when my husband made the suggestion to have them printed, I was like, how? Like, how is this going to happen? And so he was like, we can just ask Lyle. And so I was like, well, you handle that. I'm the focus on if you want think we should print it, you handle all that aspect and stuff. But they were happy to come down and print for us.
Thank goodness, because
Yeah.
there's not very many places that can handle that kind of scale.
Hmm.
And I think that the scale of those, I mean, if they're not exactly life size, they're pretty dang close, and one can step into it,
Hmm.
emotionally and psychologically. The scale matters in that work.
Yes, the gist of the work is that it is a look into my everyday life as a mom and practicing artist. And so, since it's a depiction of everyday life, I wanted it to be life size for that purpose, so that the viewers could feel like they're standing in the space with us. And then, secondly, I was inspired by Carrie James Marshall's large scale woodcut. It's untitled, but I've seen that work a total of two times in person. The first time was in 2014, but I think that was with the Traveling 30 Americans exhibition when it was in New Orleans. And then the second time was in 2019 in Miami at the Rubles Museum. They had that in their collection and they had it out. So I just fell in love with that work all over again. And then by that time, I was working on my this extended series titled Salt of the Earth. And I felt like wanting to do something significant for that body of work, and just seeing that large scale print again, I was like, I'm going to do something that large. I don't know, when or how, but I want to execute something like that in my own scale. And then the idea for it came to me maybe a week or so after I got home from that trip.
In Carrie James Marshall's epic, albeit epic, isn't there one panel that's just a flat pink?
I mean, yeah, there's some, so if you're not, for those who aren't familiar with the work, it's a group of men. I can't remember exactly how many figures, maybe four or five, but they're in an apartment. On one end, you can kind of see the exterior view of the apartment and the landscape, and then you enter the building. In the central part of the print, I believe it's 12 panels altogether. The group of men are in this living room space, and then it's a hallway, and you see a bedroom. So, yeah, and there's a lot. I think he was really, specific about how he used the space to have it grand, but also just being smart, how he was using the space. But for me, I see that as a moment in time, one particular moment. But with my work, I wanted it to kind of span the entire day. So I knew I was thinking about it as like how we think about acts in a play. So in a play, you have act one, act two, act three, act four, all the way till you get to the end. So just thinking about what were the most important parts of my day or the most significant things that I wanted to represent. And then, what type of image would illustrate that clearly.
Right.
So ended up with five scenes, but also being aware of the space that I had to work with in the museum.
Okay. So you on purpose designed it so that it would fit up on the third floor of the contemporary wing.
Well, so I had the idea for it. It's supposed to fit all in one row. Was the initial way that it's supposed the way I envisioned it. So I was invited to participate in this exhibition and to create new work for it. So I didn't want to compromise my initial vision, but I also had to be mindful of the space that the first iteration, the first display had to accommodate. And so that's why each of the scenes are separate. to give me the flexibility that, if I do have a museum that has like 60 feet that they can show it all on the line, that's great. But then I don't want to limit myself to the places that it could show. And so, having the scenes exist individually gives me the flexibility on how they can be displayed in different spaces.
And it works both ways in the presentation of it. Like, one long wall would certainly work, but splitting them up gives people sort of I compartmentalize my day. Like, I'm,
Mhm.
5 a.m. to 10 is X, and,
Mhm.
lunch. And, and for
Yeah.
you, the importance of your evening after the kids are down
Mhm.
to, go into your studio and do your work. Like, it works also to have these sort of one-on-one moments with your chapters, your play
Mhm.
acts, or however you think of it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Congratulations to you too, that, when I was a curator there often it was said, don't worry about storage. Like, if it's an important work, we will make it work. And it's true. Of course, the work is super important, but I, as a print person, who had to physically handle everything in the study room, I would
Mhm.
be like, well, maybe we'll get Stargazer instead of, because the physical nature of it becomes it's
Mhm.
a thing. It's a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So congratulations to you. They
Thank
figured out
you.
a way to make it work in the storeroom.
Yeah, and that was, you're always thinking about space, but yeah, I didn't want to compromise compromise the idea. And for me, it was like intentional. Like, this is to be in a museum,
Oh, for
space.
sure. Yeah.
But speaking of prints, so Harvard Art Museums purchased one set of the entire
Wow. Oh, that's
set.
great. Do you have somebody representing you in the prints?
What do you mean? Like,
Well, who is Harvard buying it from? You directly, or do you
no,
have a?
I control all of my own sales.
Oh,
Purchase
all
really.
right. Just another thing to put in your plates you're juggling all the time. PR, finance.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. My husband and I were a small but mighty team.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. How do you have a sense? Did you log how much time it was taking you to do each room or each panel, or?
Yeah, I had to do that just for, like, this is the biggest undertaking that I had, and then also, you have to meet a deadline. Had to meet a deadline, so I did take a log every time I went into the studio. At least, it was really important for me to do it on that, at least for that first scene, so I can get an idea of how many days, how many weeks, but everything kind of all together, from getting in the studio space, prepping the panels, carving, the printing, letting it dry a little bit, and then touching up the carving after they was printing. It was about a year.
Oh boy.
So it had started in 2020. Started in like summer, fall of 2020, and then I finished everything in May of 2021. On May 6th, the museum came to pick it up, a day before my birthday. So it's
Oh
like
my gosh.
celebration. That process is over.
So every night you manage to get into your studio?
No, not every night. That's a typical day. So the goal is usually always to get into the studio. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Things change according to the time of year or whether I'm teaching or not. So this is the second week of classes at Micah. And I'm also preparing for the IFPDA Fair, and I also homeschool too. Majority of my studio time is like Saturday and Sunday, at least for these first few weeks, while, the first 2 weeks of the semester are always the busiest. But as that kind of dies down and students are getting settled and, everybody's in their new rhythm, it'll happen different. And also, like, I'm working from two different spaces. So right now we're in my basement, but for larger works, my husband and I rent a separate space in Woodbury. And so if I'm working here, then it's easy for me to just kind of slip downstairs or whatever. For the other space, I'm primarily working there on the weekends.
Okay.
So like after we leave here, I'll rush I'll rush there to finish out the day.
I don't want to keep you too long. You have things to do. We've talked about in other episodes several ideas about what happens to you, excuse me, when you're in the moment of creating, of carving. And my friend True Ludwig always says, every cut is a decision.
Hmm.
And also, Ben Levy, who hosts some episodes of me, talks about that in the conception part about the work and how you're planning and you're working out your choreography of each scene, that your brain is doing one thing, but then when you get down to carve after you've laid out the scene and you know where you're going, like, where does your brain go when you're carving?
So I spend a lot of time on the initial drawings, just, because that's the roadmap, is how I put it. But sometimes things do change. And I'm also thinking about the subject. So if I'm carving somebody's face and I'm looking at their face and their skin, I'm thinking like, what direction is the skin moving in, I guess, if that makes sense. Or if I was sculpting this, what direction would I be stroking my hand to form this cheek? Or which way would I be stroking my hand to carve this eye? And so for me, that's how I decide which way the marks are going to go. Yeah, I do a lot of cross contour work. I guess that's kind of how I understand the images. And I try not to think about, myself as a painter different than myself as a printmaker in terms of the image formation or how I view the image. So I think I see value really well, and so that's kind of how I think about it. Whereas, some printmakers, they value the contrast, stark contrast between like dark and light. I see value, so I try to do a lot of smooth, continual tonal shifts, kind of like the way you would, a painter would think about your face as a lot of subtle tonal changes and shifts that happen. So I think about my carving in the same way, but instead of using smooth blending, I'm thinking about more linear tonality in terms of how. So I'm always thinking about which direction is this skin moving, or if I'm carving something like a sweater, what type of marks do I need to use to try to simulate this texture? Or problem solving. I may cannot get exactly what I'm seeing, but what can I use to make something that at least mimics that or references that as closely as possible.
Right.
But I do like that statement that you said, that you said true.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, that every mark, is on purpose, and it definitely is intentional. And so
Yeah.
even the mistakes,
Right. Right.
and the mistake isn't intentional, but like it's something that, it's a part of that ecosystem of marks now. And you kind of have to decide like how to move forward, you know.
Right. Once you figure out how you're going to depict the granite countertop and what what kind of pattern of marks that is, you're filling in, 4 feet of. Does it become automatic, or is it still like which way is this fleck of quartz going
It
to go?
Yeah, so in instances like that, it becomes more a matter of me learning to trust myself, because that I was kind of stuck on that scene, and that's that you're referencing the countertop in the third scene of carving on time. And so I was like, how am I going to do this? And so I looked at the texture that I saw in my references, and I was like, okay, let's just go for it and trust. And so for me, it was more matching the values that I saw. It's not like a bumpy texture like like a sweater or like the fur on a teddy bear. That's different. But the countertop is a smooth surface, but you still have all these different changes. And so for me, it was like, let me match the value or the pattern of value that I see. And so after that, it was autopilot. So picking, shifting between like 4 or 5 different tools, again, to give you the illusion that this is what it's looked like. And I think the viewer kind of also fills in the rest of the context based on where it's placed, right? Because you see that, oh, this is a kitchen scene, this is by the sink, that's a granite countertop. Whereas opposed, if that same type of texture was in another setting, you would perceive it to be something else based on the other context clues.
Do you ever dig back and look at reproductive prints from engravings from, say, 17 something or other, where they're totally playing with the cross contour and stippling and all of that? I mean, just the variety of marks has always made my jaw drop on those
Yes.
portraits and the mustache and the shiny whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of clues there, I think, for mark makers that are looking for patterns and things. So
Mm-hmm.
cool. The other thing I wanted to say, I was watching the talk that you did with the Creative Mornings. Baltimore has a great mornings talk series that you did
Mm-hmm.
recently. And you mentioned Charles White as a person that you looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was looking through some of the works, one of the hallmarks of Charles White is that I always felt like he had this incredible way of foreshortening everything. And so the hands, often, if they're in front of the figure, are outsized and take on this sort of extra something. And I noticed that it's like I'm getting a little bit of that with some of your figures in their hands. I'm like, oh, look, there's Charles White sitting right there. But the BMA, I don't know if you've ever seen this linoleum cut that they have, but they have a linoleum cut by Charles White called Voice of Jericho, which is a portrait
Mm-hmm.
of Harry Belafonte.
Mm-hmm.
And if you saw the Charles White show that MoMA did, which traveled, they had the drawing that White had done
Mm-hmm.
that still belongs to the Belafontes. And the print wasn't in the MoMA venue, which I
Right.
thought was really a shame, and I don't know why. But yeah, so what's so wonderful about it is that, there's this sort of profile of Belafonte singing upward, and the print, more than half of the print is the space above his head,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all of this swirl of sound
Yeah.
in carving. And to me, that's the linoleum cut that I would pull out the most frequently for classes to illustrate this idea of there can be more than just a person in a scene, and that
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more you can get out of it. And that was the perfect example of it. So I was going to point you at it if you've never seen it, but you have.
Yes, I have. And actually, I think one of my first maybe 2 or 3 years teaching here at Micah, I went on a trip with another professor, and we went to look at the prints and drawings room, and that was one of the works that that I
Good.
remember distinctly
Good.
from seeing from the collection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a good one. All right, so I think we should turn to your IFPDA commission, which is very exciting. When people go to the print fair in New York, everybody, and you should go, you should never miss the print fair because it's amazing. The way that the booths are laid out, there's an area right at the front of the hall where they often have a rather large sort of installation of somebody's work, like Soon was featured a couple of years ago.
So yeah, really excited to have received to receive the IFPDA Fair Artist Grants, and this will actually be my first time going to the fair. I know, right? I know. So I'm excited about that. But so I'll be showing a couple different things. So I guess the first thing that I can talk about that I'm showing is the Black Women of Print founding member portrait series. So if people aren't aware, I'm a member of Black Women of Print, which is an organization that seeks to make visible the narratives of Black women printmakers, past, present, and future. I have to make sure I quoted that correctly. And so a lot of my work is portraiture work, and I'm really inspired by women in my community and my family. Being a part of this organization, I think, is a historical moment for me. And so I wanted to commemorate the first 7 group of women who worked to bring the organization afoot. And so it was founded by Tanikia Word. And she reached out to other Black women printmakers and said, "Hey, I'm starting this collective. Would you want to be a part? Do you want to be a part of it?" But I wanted to do a series of portraits to commemorate each of those women. So specifically wanted to show that also because at the same time, the Met will be showing our inaugural portfolio titled Continuum. So each of the women in the collective at the time, we selected a Black woman printmaker who has inspired our practice in some way, and we created a portfolio of works inspired by those women. So that will be on display at the Met. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh, well, it's no brainer that I want to show this series at the IFPDA Fair. But in addition to that, I'm also creating new works for that. So another large scale work, the dimensions are like 8 feet by 12 feet. So the same as one of those scenes from Carving Out Time. So the work is in progress, but it's titled Jeanette's Daughters. And so that piece is, so it came about because of a pastor named Jeanette Howard. And so I attended her and her husband's church. His name is Dexter Howard, when I was a student at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. And so I started my undergraduate career there before I transferred to the University of Arkansas Little Rock, where I finished my degree. And so, yeah, that time was, and being a part of that ministry was, just really influential and important to me. But at the time, they were building their family, the 2 pastors. And so they ended up having a total of 6 girls. And so, by the time that I had transferred, I was getting ready to transfer to the University of Arkansas Little Rock. I believe they had just had a set of twin girls at the time. And so I have loosely kept in touch and continue to follow them mainly through social media, but still staying connected. Earlier this year, she posted a picture of all of the daughters, and they're like grown up now. And I was like, oh my gosh, I remember when they were just babies. It was kind of amazing to see, their images, and they're like all adults now. I think the twins are starting college, like they're freshmen in college this year. But seeing when she posted that photo, I was like, oh man, this would make such a great like artwork. I saved it and as inspiration. I was like, that would make such a great piece. But then when I got the invitation for the IFPDA fair, and I was like thinking about what would I do? What new piece do I want to do for that? I have some other projects already in the works, but they're going to be for other things and other shows. So I wanted to do something, new for this experience. She told me the amount of space that I had. I was like, okay, well, I want to do another, large scene. And so it clicked in my mind to do that image. And so, I asked for permission. Would you mind if I use this to as inspiration to create a piece from? So that's one of the works that I'll be showing aside from the Black Women of Print.
I mean, it's going to be sort of the centerpiece, right? Because it's so giant.
Yeah, and so hopefully I'm gonna get another either 8x4 or 8x8 piece done.
Oh, okay.
That's the goal. So being super ambitious for sure. At least the Black Women of Print series and this new piece, Jeanette's Daughters, will be on display.
One of the things that happens to me as a print curator, I've been pawing through boxes of prints for a long time, and one of the things that happens when I talk to artists like you is that it's like a slideshow in my brain of other artists that you have connections to, whether tangentially or not. And one of them is the photographer Nicholas Nixon, who has done a series of portraits of the four sisters, the Brown sisters, one of whom is his wife. And he's been doing it for, oh gosh, I don't know, 30 years or something. So you see them from sort of college age all the way through to their 60s now. And it's not like he's always posing them in the same manner. It's just like your Jeanette's daughters. It's just sort of, hey, here we are, easy. And not that I'm suggesting a serial sort of look at these daughters over time, but there's something so warm and familial about gathering with your siblings, but also the test of time and, what the natural parts of aging and, all that stuff. So that's one thought for you. And the other one is Bisa Butler's quilts. She does those wonderful historic photographs recreated as these amazing colorful quilts. And some of those figures were reminding me of what I have seen of the block that you're carving currently, which is posted online on the IFPDA site at the moment. So there was these two things, and that's what I love about art. There's nothing new, right?
Yeah.
But everybody has their own take on it, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how yours turns out.
Well, thank you for thinking about me and Bisa Butler in the same thought. Her work is phenomenal. Yeah,
I know, it's
definitely
incredible.
a big fan.
Yeah, me too. And my other questions for you, there are two other artists that, not necessarily in relation to the Jeanette's Daughters, but in terms of using large-scale wood blocks. One would be Whitfield Lavelle in his drawings. And also the other one is Joshua Close, who also combines collage and woodcut elements and, X, Y, and Z. And so it's like, I don't know, there could be a great show with you guys together.
Let's make it happen. I love both of those, their works.
Yeah, me too. Whitfield, I've never met Whitfield, and boy, I'd love to pick his brain. My God, what a talent.
Yeah, I've met. Well, we haven't met in person, but I invited Joshua Klaus to do an artist talk for my contemporary practices in drawing class last semester at Micah. Wonderful talk. The students really enjoyed his work, and it was also really important for them to see this kind of interdisciplinary approach that he has. It kind of touches so many areas. There's drawing, there's printmaking, there's sculpture, and now kind of even some things with the garden project that he did is kind of tapping into performance as well. So yeah, he has such a multifaceted process that I think is just really amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the other nice thing about artists such as yourself that are bringing prints into the painting world or assemblage or however you want to call it is, prints are always, people forget about prints. It's not fair and it's not right. And so I feel like, if there's just an element of it somewhere and people are like, hey, what's that thing? Let me learn more about it. So well done. As the print evangelist.
Yeah, and I think, I think I can't help but kind of step into that teaching aspect of myself as well, and just kind of not assuming that people understand what I mean when I say I'm a printmaker. And then even like you were talking about, just the process from this wood block to this print, like people just aren't, it doesn't click to them about what it takes or what goes into the process of making this edition of works on paper.
Yeah, we're blessed with a lot of great videos online about how this all works and the great reveal and everything. And I think that's helping our cause because it all just clicks as soon as you see the reversal pull off the block and you're like, holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I had one other thought for you, which is, and then I'll let you go because I know you have to get to your studio to start
Okay.
carving. The last thing I wanted to ask you about or comment on, maybe this is not supposed to be the Ann show; it's supposed to be the LaToya show. But motherhood is hard to do well, right? Because
Um,
it can go to puppies and kittens, so fast and cute kids. But there's a gravitas that you've brought to it that I think is making it work better than I ever could have imagined motherhood working as a subject. And the scale, the monumentality of the scale and the unavoidable scale of it when you're in its presence. And I applaud you because it's a tough subject to do well.
yeah, and I avoided work about I avoided doing work about my life as a mom for a while. I mean, I'm still a young mother. Well, not. I mean, I'm almost 40, but in terms of mother years, like it's only 8 years in the game. So yeah, but I purposely did not do work about my being a mom or like with my children in it, for those reasons. Not because I didn't think I could do it well, but I think I was more concerned with how I would be perceived as an artist using
Uh,
that as a subject matter. And so I just kind of avoided it, and so, and I just kind of got to a point where I felt like I should not have to apologize for being a mom. That's like a really important part of my life, at least in this stage right now. That's important. And so when I think artists become from a place where, at least some people, most artists that I know, like you make work about your experience, and that is such a big that's such a big part of my experience right now. And I think that work, at least carving out time, and there's another work I did of me and my sons called The Everyday, and I think those works are so impactful because so many people have that same experience. And I feel like, when you go into museum spaces or gallery spaces, you don't see it represented. So it was me just like, it's like, hey, this is a part of my life. This is who I am. Like, you're just gonna have to deal with these images. But I mean, at the same time, I don't want to be known as the artist who does work about motherhood. So my work is about womanhood, I guess, is a broader way to touch on that. My experience, the womanhood, and being a mother just happens to be a part of that. And so I do have some other images of my children that I want to do, but a lot of those images were taken like in 2015. So now it's like 5, 6 years later, I'm just kind of starting to allow myself to explore those images and depict emotions and feelings from that time. But then also just me now as a mom, part of that. But then the balancing act. How do I depict that in an authentic way that isn't, just the cutesy, you know, type of type of image, but just really kind of staying true to myself and true to my experience.
yeah. I do love the work that you did of yourself just before you gave birth to your older child. You were talked about the gray, using the gray values as a leaping off point in terms of you're birthing yourself as a mother and you're birthing your
Mhm.
child as a child. And I
Mhm.
love that idea. And I, people have a hard time with pregnancy. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to think
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah,
And
I
I
agree. Yeah.
yeah, and I think your unapologetic, presentation is like, deal. I think I'm in.
Damn.
I'm in because it's not easy, and I think we all bear it with some sort of grace, at least in how that might seem to the outside world, because we're always trying to present our best selves. But it's
Mhm.
hard.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
but it's
you,
also the highest highs and the lowest lows, right?
yeah, and it's constantly changing.
Right. The only constant is change.
Yeah, constantly changing.
Yeah.
As kids get older, I have to relearn things that work and what doesn't work, and discovering more about them as people, more layers of the onion come off. So things that worked last year probably will not work the next year. So it's kind of this, relationship, them learning me and me learning them at the same time.
Right, right. Yeah, there's no license for this job, right? The thing that I had probably not the most trouble with, but one of the things that I kept tripping up on was realizing that they could now do that thing for themselves, like tying their shoes. Like I was still tying shoes, and someone would say to me, he knows how to tie a shoe. Like, what? What do you mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, I don't know. I'm training them as they're the next assistants. So I was like, I need you guys to be as independent as possible. As soon as you see they have the faculties and to do something, let's try to do it. And I think this, one of the reasons why we ended up homeschooling is because we just kind of started making everyday lessons a part of their normal life. And so once I saw that they knew their letters and they knew all the sounds, like, okay, well, let's learn how to read. I didn't wait and say, oh, well, they can't learn to read until they're this age. They were reading at 3 because they could do it. And so now it's like they make their own lunch. They make their own lunch. Like, let's learn how to fold clothes. This is the washing machine. This is how it works. So just one, my goal is for them to be independent people. And also, like, I'm just not going to be the only one doing all this stuff
Yes, indeed.
in the house. And so I think, we're just thinking about responsibility, personal responsibility, boundaries, and life skills. I'm a big proponent of once they show that they have the capability to do something, just teach them to do it. And then also to give them more credit.
I think you're a couple years ahead of me on the doing the laundry thing. Mine didn't start until they were about 10, I think. All right. If people want to follow you, is there a best way to do that? Is Instagram your primary?
I'm not the biggest social media person. Like, I don't have Twitter. I don't do TikTok. I have a Facebook account, but barely. So the primary way, I think, if you want to see progress or things that I'm posting here and there, you can go to Instagram. My Instagram is LaToya Hobbs. And then also, I have a website, LaToyaMHobbs.com. And if people want to know more about the carving out time work, my husband produced a video of me showing the behind the scenes network. You can go to LaToya M. Hobbs Studio on YouTube.
Yeah, I watched it. It's nice. He did a great job. All right. So thank you. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. And hopefully I did want to mention, actually, before I let you go, that in addition to your work being front and center as you enter the IFPDA Print Fair, which everyone needs to go to, there is a panel discussion that's occurring on Friday afternoon, October 28th, which is featuring the Black women of print, but I don't know if everyone's going to be there.
No, not everyone. So far, for sure, I know it's myself, Delita Martin, Stephanie Santana, and I think maybe Jennifer McWatkins.
Yeah.
And it's not everybody in the original 7, but there will be at least maybe 4 or 5 people there.
And it's a panel being moderated by Kimberly Gant, who's a curator out at the Brooklyn Museum. So that ought to be great for people who are going to the fair. Yes. And also, I think I'm going to have some day passes to give away. How I'm going to do that, I'm not sure. But stay tuned, people. And also to note that the IFPDA is generously sponsoring this episode with LaToya. So kudos to them. And I'll include more about the fair and all the links you need on the show notes. So. All right, we'll say goodbye for now, and thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, thanks so much for listening. And you have your marching orders. 1, get yourself to New York for Print Week. 2, get yourself there for the panel discussion at the IFPDA Fair featuring LaToya Hobbs. And 3, go over to platemarkpodcast.com and hit the support button. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks to LaToya for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it. And also thanks to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. Next time, we'll be speaking with curator Maureen Warren, who is a scholar of Dutch 17th century political prints and has an exhibition up at her institution, the Krannert Art Museum, which is part of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign's campus. We had a great discussion about the relatability of 17th century political prints with today. She thinks of the prints from then as the original memes. And you can listen to her talk about the excitement of putting that all together. It was a 10-year journey to fruition. All right, I think that's it. We'll see you next time.